Hey everybody, it's been a long time since I've used my voice in a video. I'm currently on a brief vacation, so I decided I'd take some time to do a video that I've been meaning to make for a long time now. I'm going to analyze the last video that I put out and examine why each stab worked. In order to do this, I'm going to slow each clip down and then play them a couple of times each. I'll explain why I did what I did and why it worked. In general, each of these stabs can be broken down into two main components. The first is recognition, the second is prediction. So recognition is exactly like what it sounds like. It's the ability to recognize what situation you're in. Prediction is the judgment you make after recognizing the situation you're in. For example, is that Pyro going to turn around? I'm going to be going over what I recognized in each of these clips and what I predicted. Alright, so for this first stab, it's a really tight Matador stab. So if you look closely, you'll be able to tell that I'm intentionally going for this Matador. I expected the NG to follow me up this little incline here when I decloaked. So I was really prepping to do a blind kind of reverse jump stab on him. But he surprised me by not going after me and instead just running forward. So realizing that he's now looking at me, I run at him and notice that he has a building out. I predict at this point that he's just going to freak out and start trying to track me. Right? Since it's really weird, it's a really weird spot and he has a building out and he's kind of defenseless in some senses. So I run towards him and move to the left. Now if you're paying attention here, you'll realize I actually can't stab him from the left. There's nothing I can do there. But I predict that because he's kind of stressed out and freaked out, he's just going to turn and try to track me. And because of that, he's going to, he's turning to his right and he's opening up his left shoulder for the stab there. So this next stab looks like a really aggro lucky stab, but hear me out on this. So I go for this stab for two reasons. Reason one is the less important one. I'm using the Dead Ringer and figure I can just feign and run towards third point if it goes sour. Reason 2 is a bit more interesting. This Pyro has just rounded the corner out of spawn and isn't ready for a spy running right at him. In general, people are bad at making split-second decisions. For reference, this Pyro isn't bad, or really inexperienced. I think he has a Hail Zone degreaser for whatever that's worth, so he's clearly put some time into the class. The reason the timing is so key here is that trick stab awareness is not some binary thing where you're either aware of trick stabs or you're not aware of trick stabs. Awareness depends on your ability to recognize a situation as one where a trick stab is possible. This Pyro only sees me for like half a second, and when I'm basically 2 feet in front of him and moving towards him. In that fraction of a second, he has to first recognize that I'm in fact a spy, and recognize that I'm running behind him. He also has to assess what my goal is. If he saw me running at him from further away, I have no doubt that he would have just flamed, air blasted, and flared me. However, he sees me just as I'm about to pass him, so he likely thinks that I'm trying to run into the building. This was in fact my plan, until I saw him. So knowing that he has just seen me pass him, I assume that he will immediately turn back towards his right to track me, since that is what really any decent player would do in this situation. Because we're moving in opposite directions, I know that turning motion he has to make is going to be very large and very quick. So I quickly reverse directions here and get the stab as he's turning to his right. Alrighty, so these next couple of stabs are more elementary. When you bump into a player head on, they have a tendency to keep their W key pressed, so that if you strafe a little bit to the side, they keep moving forward. If you know that tendency, then it makes it really easy to get a stab. All you do is run into them, strafe a little bit to the side, and snap your view to the side as they pass you to get the stab. Once I butterknife the medic, I'm pretty confident that he's going to be following me. As a rule, newer players never suspect a trick stab if they don't see you prepping for it in a really obvious position. So the reason I go for the stab here is threefold. First of all, it's a medic, and I'm full health. So even if I flub the stab, the odds are that I'm going to be able to escape. The second reason is that I've got multiple outs, because the area I'm in has a ton of different escape routes, so this just increases the odds that I'm going to be able to get out alive, even if I flub the stab. And lastly, since the stab is blind, I'm pretty sure I'm not going to flub the stab, because I doubt he'll see it coming. So these are obviously subconscious thoughts, since it happens really quickly. But you can develop these snap instinctual judgments when you've played a lot of Spy. I point them out because I think these are the things that you should be considering. The actual execution of the stab is nothing special because I don't really do anything weird. All it requires is knowing how long it takes the player to decide to follow you, and how long it takes them to get to the spot you want them in. The only thing that really bears mentioning here is that it's worth looking at maps in terms of all of their smaller elevation changes. A lot of people see stair stabs coming, but a much smaller percentage understand that stairs are totally unnecessary for overhead stabs. So this next stab is in close quarters, and there are only two important factors here. First is that jumping from railings is less common and quicker than other overhead stabs. Second is that the scout is not likely to move. Why, you ask? Well, I'm right in front of him, and his movement is kind of constrained by the fact that he is on a really narrow walkway. You also have to consider that if he were to move, he would have to rapidly snap his crosshair to the side in order to track me, which is pretty difficult. It's a lot easier for him to just stay in one place, track me with his scattergun, and fire as soon as he can. If you are particularly observant, you may have noticed that when he saw me move back out from the corner, he backed up so that he had a clearer view of me. This is a movement pattern I see a lot in newer players. If a player isn't really comfortable in their aim, they often use their movement as a crutch of sorts in order to make it easier to hit their shots. It's quite hard to track a moving player right in front of your face because you have to make these large adjustments, since they're moving really fast across your screen. In order to make the opponent easier to hit, newer players often back up to keep people in middle range. When the opponent is further away, they appear to move slower across the screen, making them an easier target. As players become more experienced, they start using their movement more strategically. For example, the scout might know that my only chance to kill him is with a stab, so he might have jumped back off the ledge, or continued moving forwards along the ledge, cutting off any escape route. So I know this sounds like I'm reading too much into a split-second encounter, but I see lots of players like this scout, and learning how to read the opponent's movements and skill level is a big part of playing Spy in pubs. This last stab is on the same Pyro as earlier in the video. You're gonna have to trust me on this that this Pyro isn't actually bad. This stab actually exploits a similar lack of reaction time as the first stab. On first glance, you'd think that the Pyro should have reacted in time, and to be honest, I think he probably would like to have this one back. If you are observant, however, you would probably have noticed that he was looking towards the cart path initially, and was just turning back to the left as I jumped off the platform. His attention was still likely on whatever he had been looking at. I know that I often start moving towards a direction before I really start paying attention to whatever is now in front of me. I exploited that fact here. That was the last stab for today's video. So this was a bit of a proof of concept video, so hopefully you found it interesting. My goal was to give you some of the thought processes I use when deciding whether or not to go for a particular stab. The reason I love playing Spy in TF2 is because it relies on exploiting psychology and movement patterns. Keep practicing, and maybe you'll get good enough that angry people will call you a weeb. Keep it creamy, guys.
I'm not cheating. I've just played the game for a decent amount of time.
You literally headshot a person without looking at him. I want you to explain that one to me, buddy.
What you see is not what I see on my POV. It's a lagged representation. I got kicked.